Well, thank you for taking the time to visit Door Renew. Let's take a look at a mahogany door that we restored a couple of years ago. And you'll see this is the door, and it's fairly common to the condition of doors that we see. If you'll notice, the top is in pretty good shape. You'll notice there's still the finish is intact. There's still a decent amount of gloss. In the center area of the door, it's an okay shape. You can start to see some wearing, some fading, but the bottom is where we really see a lot of damage. And here's a close-up of the bottom of this door. You can see at the very bottom edge, it's peeling, it's flaking, it's coming off in chunks, areas where there is no finish left at all, areas where it's cracked. And as I mentioned, this is fairly common. And the reason it's common is because what's really damaging these doors is, for the most part, the UV rays from the sun, the ultraviolet effects from the sunshine. And the top of the door, which is often covered, at least in part, by an overhang or a porch, doesn't get that much sun. The middle gets less than the bottom, so there's less exposure to the harmful UV rays, but it's the bottom that's exposed to more sun than any part of the door, and in addition, any moisture, rain that would blow against it, a sprinkler. If you're in an area of the country where there's snow might blow against the door, and that's going to collect at the bottom. So you have a combination of the UV and the detrimental effects of moisture/water, and that can really wreak havoc with the door. Another thing we like to look for when we're inspecting the door is what had been done to the door before we got there. And this is fairly common. Someone had at one point tried to restore the door, refinish at least portions of it. And we know that because you can see around on the metal of the handset there's some stain that's clearly not from the original finish. There's buildup on the trim pieces around this panel and in the corners. And it doesn't show up so well in the picture, but it wasn't an exact match. You can see exactly where it had been placed. Again, very common. And many times people who did this, whether it's the homeowner or a handyman, they're not quite doing it right because they're putting a stain on top of a varnish and it's not going to stick. So we always look for those sorts of things and make sure we deal with it. The doors we like to bring to our shop. We like to work on them where they're in a controlled environment and in a horizontal position. And you can see this door has already been stripped and sanded. And that is some delicate work, especially on a door like this. You might remember how the bottom looked with all that peeling, all that fading, all that cracking. And if you go in there just haphazardly and roughly try to just start scraping and stripping, you could very easily pull a veneer off of a door. Most doors, although they're solid wood, there's a veneer of, in this case, mahogany on top of that door, and you can easily sand or scrape right through that veneer. So you have to know what you're doing. You have to be careful. It's a lot of elbow grease, and you can see in this case we were able to actually save this door. Sometimes we do have to replace that veneer, but in this case we were able to replace it. Prior to getting to this stage, however, we noticed that some of the molding around the window trim was in very, very bad shape. You can see there we've actually have removed it at this point. And again, this is a common place for these sorts of challenges because it's the bottom of the window. Any moisture that would have collected on the window and ran down is going to sit there. And that moisture is going to do bad things. So before we even start the scraping process, we had to replace that wood, mold it properly, and then we could scrape it down to the condition that you saw in that first picture on this slide of bare wood. And then we can start putting in, applying some stain. We put some samples in there just to make sure we're matching the customer's specifications. And then, as most woodworkers would do, we're going to start with the recessed panels, the trim areas, the molding. The last part that we're going to do would be the flat areas of the door. But already you can start to see that door is starting to look a lot better than when we first got it. You might remember that bottom, the rough shape that was in. Remember all the peeling, the flaking, areas where there was no finish left at all. You remember the cracks that we saw up in this panel and other areas here that was significant fading. Our process was able to bring that back to life. And there's the finished door. Now this is before we apply a matte coat to the door. Usually it's the very last thing we do when we have the job with side lights done. This case is still fairly glossy. When we put that matte finish on, it dulls that down quite a bit. So you might remember that the door had side lights. And we obviously can't bring those into our shop. They're part of the home. And so we do those in place. And you can see here we have them stripped and sanded. One area we pay particular attention is the inside corners. You can get situations where you just get buildup of varnish and stain. And if that isn't completely removed and you put more on there, it just builds it up even more. So we're meticulous about getting that very, very clean before we apply our finish coats. Let's take a look at this door from start to finish. Remember the start. Top was in pretty good shape. Middle, not so. Bottom was pretty rough. And there's a close-up of that panel at the bottom again, and you can see just some of that significant damage, especially along the bottom, but also in these recessed panels, cracks in this area. And there's that door before the matte coat was applied, but you can already see what a tremendous difference that makes. And as I mentioned, this door was done a couple of years ago. After a couple of years, we drove by, got the customer's permission to take another picture, and this is the finished picture with that matte coat on. And even after a couple of years where it's getting a lot of sun, this door is still in fabulous shape, and we expect it will continue to do so. But again, thank you for looking at Door Renew, and we encourage you to give us a call, look us up online, send us an email with any and all of your door restoration questions. We appreciate hearing from you. Thanks so much.